Well, good afternoon. I hope you had a good weekend. I hope your week is off to a good start and that last week was also strong in terms of your first week of classes. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to everyone that sent in those questions, those introductory ones that were due on Friday. You've all gotten them back now. If you had any trouble opening the docs that I sent back or looking at any of my comments, please be sure to let me know. Send me an email. The grades have also been posted in Blackboard. Remember, that counted as the first quiz grade, so those are all entered. So if you see any issues with that or you can't access your grades for some reason, also definitely send me an email and let me know if you're having any trouble with any of that Blackboard stuff, especially now that we're a week in. Hopefully you've had a little bit of time to explore Blackboard, get a sense of what's on there, and also get a sense of the kind of schedule that we'll be on, as we go forward in the semester. So for this video, I want to talk a little bit about the Toni Morrison, that short essay that I'm asking you to read for this week, which I use every semester that I teach this essay. I always start with Mike Rose, and then I use the Toni Morrison piece as sort of a supplement to the Mike Rose, because it is, as you can see, a lot shorter, but it covers a lot of the same territory. And one of the differences that I want to mention about this one, and this difference is important, I should also say, particularly as we start thinking about the first paper for the class, is that Mike Rose's essay, as he says, is a cognitive biography. I've used that phrase before. So, the bulk of the essay is him discussing his mother's work in the 1950s, his uncle's work, and identifying those skills that they needed to develop, both the physical manual labor skills and also the mental skills that were necessary to perform those jobs. The Toni Morrison piece, if you've taken a look at it, or if you're about to take a look, you'll see is more focused on her experience, this first job that she had when she was a kid, decades ago in the early 1940s. And I have it here in front of me. There's two parts of it that I really want to emphasize and that I want to focus on. So what I'll do today is I'll talk a little bit about the essay. I'll explain how we're going to use it as another possible model for paper number 1. And then I'll talk a little bit about that paper. Later this week, we're going to have the second quiz, the reading quiz that focuses just on Mike Rose. But I always put questions on those quizzes about the essay that's coming up. So the very last question on the quiz this week is going to ask you to tell me more about what you're going to write about and how you're going to approach this first essay. So what is your subject going to be, and how are you going to start thinking about structuring that paper. So one of the ways to help prep for the quiz this week is, in addition to reading the Mike Rose piece and reading some of the notes and watching the other videos that I posted on it, is also please make sure you've read the directions for paper number 1. If you haven't had a chance to do so, take a look. The due date is on there. All the other requirements are there. The prompt is there. So there's a lot of information on it. Go through it, take a look. But today I'm also going to talk a little bit about that because, again, we're going to use Mike Rose and the Toni Morrison pieces as models. So we're not responding directly to them. That's important to remember. We're not analyzing their essays. We're going to get to that actually with paper number 2. This one is focused more on telling your own narrative, or again, if you're writing about someone else, another person's story about a particular work or volunteer experience that they had. And we're going to use Rose and Morrison kind of as our models. And you will have the opportunity to quote from them, particularly if you're doing a comparison with some of their ideas, or you see something in their work that kind of reflects your own experiences in your paper. So let me first talk about the Morrison piece. There's really 2 sections of it that I want you to pay really close attention to. And the first one is really the first couple of paragraphs. Morrison, passed away last year, was a master of this kind of writing. The level of description and the economy of her descriptions, by that I mean the concise way in which she was able to paint a picture of something, is really impressive. And, this is a person you have to remember who was a Nobel Prize winning writer who produced a lot of amazing books. Her best known one is definitely Beloved, which was done in the late 80s, early 90s. There was a film based on it. My favorite is this one called Home. This was a later book that she did a few years ago. And one thing that you're going to notice if you read more of her work, or if you ever get a chance to read this short novel that she did later in her life, is that the longer she wrote, the more compact her writing got, the more concise it got. This essay is a good example of that. She'd spent a lifetime learning her craft and practicing it, and you can really see the dividends that it paid out in this later work that she did. And I'm biased. I find her to be one of the best and the strongest American writers of the last 50 years, at least. So there's a lot to be learned from seeing how she structures things, particularly in these essays. Her fiction is fantastic, but her essays, I think, are a little bit underrated because she's so well known as a novelist. So if you take a look at the opening section of this, she says the following, and these are the kind of concise descriptions, concise and concrete descriptions that make this such a powerful, if brief, essay. So here's how she starts off. She says, all I had to do for the $2 was clean her house for a few hours after school. It was a beautiful house, too, with a plastic-covered sofa and chairs, wall-to-wall blue and white carpeting, a white enamel stove, a washing machine, and a dryer, things that were common in her neighborhood, but absent in mine. In the middle of the war, she had butter, sugar, steaks, and seam-up-the-back stockings. So this is at the beginning of World War II in the early 1940s. And if you've read along with me on that passage, you'll notice not only does she have all those specific details of the kinds of things that her family would not have been able to afford, and those are things like the enamel stove, the washing machine, the dryer, maybe things that we might take for granted now, but at the time, that's high technology, and it's not something that's accessible to every household in the early 1940s, and that's something that's important to remember as you read through this. So she's working for someone who is a lot wealthier than she is, and you'll notice that she also capitalizes her. Anytime she mentions her employer, whether it's with her or with she, any of those pronouns she always capitalizes. It's almost as though she's remembering all of this from a child's perspective. So when she's writing it, she's not totally writing it from her adult perspective of someone who at this point would have been well into her 70s, but she's writing it from that child's eye view of the world. This is an employer that is a lot wealthier than she is, has all of these perks that she's not able to access. And the employer is also white, and she's African American, so there's a racial difference here as well that she's describing, but she's doing it in such a way that there's a subtlety to it because she wants to draw you into the essay, and she ultimately wants to lead you to the ending. And the ending of this essay is also significant in much the same way that the Mike Rose one was, but in this case, and you'll see this when you read it if you haven't done so. I don't want to give too much away, so if you want to pause the video now and you don't want spoilers, you can stop and come back. But let me mention the ending where the employer has been giving her these hand-me-down clothes. And for her father, this is a point of pride, and her father gives her the ending, the lesson at the very end of it. Here's what he says to her, and she remembers this lesson that he provided to her. And he says the following. He says, listen, you don't live there, you live here with your people. Go to work, get your money, and come on home. And she elaborates on that. So at the very end of it, she actually breaks it down into 4 different pieces of advice that she remembers from her father in terms of what work meant for her. For her, family is central. So work is important. She has to make a living. She spent her whole life first as a teacher, then as an editor, then as a writer, provided for her family, provided for her children through her writing skills and her skills as a teacher and as an editor. But these are the lessons that she took from her father, who instilled these in her when she was a child. And the lessons are these. First, it says, whatever the work is, do it well, not for the boss, but for yourself. 2, you make the job. It doesn't make you. 3, your real life is with us, your family. And lastly, 4, you are not the work you do. You are the person that you are. So you see where that title comes from for the essay in these last couple of pieces. And so then she elaborates on all the work that she did after that, after this first job, this first experience she has. So you'll notice that whereas Mike Rose gives us a concluding lesson about democracy and the way in which we would be wise to respect many different types of people doing different kinds of jobs if we want to have a strong integrated society, Toni Morrison's focusing on family and how once we go into the workplace and into the world, that's significant. And she says, sure, do a good job. But that for her, family came first. That was the thing that her father tried to instill in her. And that's what she wants to express to us. And if you have read her other novels, that's a consistent theme throughout all of them. Home, just the title alone tells you exactly what this book is about. It's about a brother who's getting back from World War II. He's a veteran, and he's trying to find his sister who has been missing. And it's almost a mystery novel where he finally tracks her down and saves her life. And I'm not giving too much away with that either, because the way that it all unfolds is very surprising. and very moving. So that was a theme throughout all of her life. It came not only from that workplace experience, but also from her father's advice to her. So as you're reading this essay and you're thinking about it in comparison to the Mike Rose piece that we read last week, I want you to look at not only how they use these specific details, because those are things that you can also model in your paper, but you'll notice that they always build up to this kind of lesson at the end. It's like reading a parable or a fable of some sort, where they want to convey these ideas to you at the very end of the piece. So you might want to think about that for your essay, where the body of it is all these specific details on the work or the job that you're talking about, and then you lead up to this particular lesson at the very end of the essay. And in the next video, which I'm also going to post today, I'm going to talk a little bit about that structure. But for now, that's your little introduction to Toni Morrison. I hope you find that it's a good complementary piece to the Mike Rose. It's more personal, it's more first person, her experience, especially for those of you that might be writing about your first job experience or are thinking about doing that for paper number 1. This is a good model. The Mike Rose piece, as you can see, is more of a third person narrative. He talks about himself, but he's also talking about his mother and his uncle. So he's taking that kind of objective perspective to describe the work that they did. This is more personal, it's more intimate. And again, it's because it's about family and about the lessons that her dad imparted to her. It's got a slightly different focus. But again, I think the two essays work well together, particularly as models for the paper that we're going to start working on this week. Okay, so in the next video, which I'm also going to post today, I'll talk a little bit about the structure of your essay. But in the meantime, as I said, if you haven't gone back and looked at Mike Rose, please make sure you read it, read the Toni Morrison, and let me know if you have any questions on the readings or even on these assignments that we have coming up. Okay, I'll talk to you again in a second about the structure of this paper.